Hi guys, what's up? Joko here and welcome to my geekiest video ever. But before I start, I hope you guys can click subscribe and hit the bell below to support my channel. So in this video, I will be geeking out because I will be talking about this behemoth of a pedal here, the Poly Beebo. The Poly Beebo is a very innovative super gadget that can open your ears into a new spectrum of sounds. It's a multi-modulation pedal with tons of reverbs and delays that are very unique and complex. Plus, it has modular synthesizer capabilities, and it has lots of effects modules that are inspired by Euro rack synths. The Beebo also has the basic tools for tone shaping like EQ, compressor, and saturation modules. But wait, there's more. It also has power amp sims, a bass amp sim, and a cab sim IR loader. The IR capabilities are just insane. You can load your own cab and reverb impulses as long as they're 48 kHz. It also allows you to have more comprehensive routing schemes because it has 4 ins and 4 outs. Yes, these are TRS input jacks, meaning you can run them in stereo. You can create effects loops internally, you can use this as an outboard processor with your DAW, create chains with parallel processing, and more. The possibilities with this baby are endless. The crazy thing is you have all this power inside a very compact pedal with a touchscreen. It's basically a full-fledged music production studio rig inside a box. Fun fact, this used to be the Poly Digit. Poly Effects actually launched two devices, the Digit, which is this pink one, and the Beebo, which is the blue-colored version. The Digit was for multi-modulation effects, reverbs, delays, amp sims, cab sims, and studio effects. And the Beebo was for modular synth and Euro rack synth effects. What's interesting with the devices is you can actually interchange the functionalities of the two pedals with just a firmware update. So it's like getting two pedals in one. But I have to commend Poly Effects because they just released a firmware update that combines the capabilities of the Digit and the Beebo into the all-new Beebo, turning this thing into an ultimate studio in a box. So here are some ways on how I use it. For guitar, this is my main patch called Joko Main. Before I dive into this patch, let me elaborate on what the basic elements of my tone are. Basically, the sounds I use on my original songs and covers. The first one is my dry sound. This is what I use for rhythm. The second one is my main lead sound, which is basically my dry sound drenched in reverb and delay. The third one is my wet ambient, which can either be clean or dirty. And lastly, my dotted eighth delay sound, which I use on the intro of my song, Sonic Spaghetti. I dialed in these sounds into 4 signal chains that are all in parallel, so the chains won't affect one another. It's like how you go about the effects and returns of the AWs. Then I used VCA modules that are controlled by these foot switches to turn the chains on and off. Okay, so the routing on this patch is pretty complicated, so I'll just flash a diagram on the screen while I'm explaining the chains. So my first chain is my dry sound, so it's just a power amp and a cab sim running IRs from Endall cabs. The second chain is my lead sound, so from the power amp and cab sim, it goes into a delay and a reverb with a large hall reverb impulse response. It's controlled by foot switch A. The next chain is my dotted 8 delay sound. So we have a basic delay module with a dotted 8 setting dialed in at 105 BPM. So that's about 428 milliseconds. This chain is controlled by foot switch B. The last chain is my wet ambient sound. First off, we have a granular synthesis module. This basically takes your audio signal and chops them up into small particles of 1 to 50 or 100 milliseconds called grains. This is then scrambled into different positions to form new and different sounds. Then after this module, I add in a reverb to drench the granular effect. This creates a sound that's very similar to a shimmer reverb, but with more weird and interesting reflections. So that's how I use it for guitar. Now let's see how I use this thing for bass. This is my main patch for the bass called jaw bass. This patch has two of the bass sounds that I use for recording, a clean sound and a dirty bass sound. This patch is basically a split and grit setup with two chains that are in parallel. The first chain is the clean bass sound, so first off we have a mono compressor going into an amp sim and the cab sim that's running an Ampeg 8x10 IR. The second chain activates the dirty bass sound that I use for gent and rock. This chain is run in parallel with the clean bass sound so the distortion won't affect the overall low end of the bass sound. So from the mono compressor we go into an EQ that cuts all the low end of the sound so only the mid and high frequencies could be distorted. Then from the EQ we go into a saturator and a power amp sim module. This is basically my distortion section. Then from the distortion section, the signal is split into two cab sim modules so I could blend IR sounds. Then both the chains go into a wet-dry stereo module so I could control the overall blend of the two signal chains. Then from the wet-dry stereo module, the signal goes into an EQ and a compressor so I can clean up and balance out the sound. So that's how I use the Beebo for bass. I also use the Beebo as an external processor when I mix. I only use it when the CPU of my laptop overloads, whenever I load in lots of plugins into multiple tracks in my DAW. This rarely happens, but fortunately I have the Beebo to help me out. So my setup for this is pretty simple. It's like how you would set up your outboard gear. The outputs 3 and 4 of my Evo 8 interface go into the Poly Beebo. Then from the Beebo, it goes back into the Evo 8 on channels 3 and 4. I normally use this setup for drum bus and vocal processing. Okay, so first off, the drum bus. So here's my patch for my drum bus. It has 3 chains, all are in parallel. The first chain is the main signal, so we only have a stereo EQ and a stereo compressor. The second one is the ambient chain, so we have a reverb and an EQ to trim out the low end of the reverb. The last chain is a parallel compression chain, which is controlled by a VCA module. Here's how it sounds. So that's how I use this setup for drums. Now here's how I use it for vocals. The vocal patch has 3 chains, dry, reverb, and delay. All are routed in parallel. The main signal is the dry sound. So we have a warm and a saturation module, then it goes into an EQ and a compressor. So from the dry sound, it splits into 2. One goes to a reverb module, one goes to the delay module. The reverb chain has an EQ on the end of it, so I could trim out the low end. Here's how it sounds.
Are you happy when you see your own reflection? You owe it to yourself to be free.
So that's how it works and how I use it. Now I want to show you a track that I made playing around with this cool device. Let's go! So there you go, the Poly Beebo. It's a really awesome device to have in your studio, and for sure, this pedal can turn your gigging setup into a monster rig. By the way, a big thank you to GC Rockboard for hooking me up. If you guys are interested in getting the Beebo, just head over to gcrockboard.com. So that's it guys, thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to subscribe if you haven't yet, and hit the notification bell below so you'll be notified when I post my upcoming videos. So till then, stay safe, stay healthy, and stay positive. Bye bye.